I still remember the day it happened, clear as if it were yesterday. A bunch of punks were hassling a single mom inside a laundromat, and before long, 100 bikers rolled up and brought the whole block to a dead stop. But it didn't start that way. Linda pushed open the laundromat's glass door, nudging it with her hip while she hauled that oversized laundry bag that always looked heavier than she was. Her arms were already aching from the weight, and the warm, soapy air hit us the moment she stepped inside. That familiar smell of detergent mixed with heat wrapped around her like it always did. Her old sneakers squeaked across the freshly mopped floor, loud enough to make the place feel even emptier. Those bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing these harsh, stretched-out shadows across the rows of machines. Her kids, Jake and Sarah, walked in behind her, faces buried in their phones like usual. They slipped into the hard plastic chairs by the window without saying a word. This wasn't their first Saturday stuck here. Linda watched them for a second, this heaviness settling in her chest. They were good kids. They never complained, even though she knew they had 1,000 better places they'd rather be. The laundromat was mostly quiet that day, just an older lady folding sheets in the corner, and a college kid asleep in a chair while his clothes spun in the dryer. You'd think the calm would have felt nice, but for Linda, it just made all the noise in her head louder. Her thoughts were racing faster than any of those machines. She started sorting her clothes automatically. Lights here, darks there, her hands moving like they didn't need her brain anymore. Meanwhile, her thoughts drifted toward the stack of bills waiting back home. Rent was due in 2 days, and she was still short. Her boss at the grocery store had cut her hours again, and the electric bill had jumped higher than she expected. I remember her opening her wallet and counting quarters, just barely enough for 3 loads if she stretched things exactly right. She'd have to mix clothes that really shouldn't be washed together, but she didn't have much of a choice. The washing machines started their usual hum, but somehow it sounded louder that day. She shut the door on the first load right as the little chime over the entrance rang. That's when a group of young guys strolled in, laughing loud enough to drown out the machines. They looked like they were in their early 20s. Expensive sneakers, pricey hoodies, the whole look. They dumped their laundry into machines without sorting a thing, still talking loud enough for everyone to hear. Linda kept her head down, measuring out detergent like she didn't notice them. But those guys weren't the quiet type. Their voices kept getting louder, sharper somehow. You could feel them looking at her faded jeans, at that worn sweater she'd stitched back together more times than she wanted to admit. "Hey, check out the bag, lady," one of them snickered, not even trying to hide it. "Guess some people can't afford real clothes." I could almost feel the heat rising up Linda's neck just from the way she tightened her shoulders. She tried to ignore them, but their words cut sharper than they had any right to. Maybe if she worked a little harder she could buy something from this century, another one said, setting off a round of laughs. Her hands shook a little as she closed the washing machine door. Jake and Sarah shrank down in their seats, cheeks burning from embarrassment. Linda wanted to say something. You could see it in the way she swallowed, but the words just wouldn't come. "What's wrong, lady? Too tired to shop anywhere but the bargain bin?" the tallest one yelled across the room, setting off another burst of laughter. Every insult hit her like a shove. She kept staring at the clothes swirling in the machine, trying to hold on to anything that felt steady. But her chest tightened, her eyes stung, and suddenly even the steady rhythm of the washers felt like it was mocking her. The bright lights overhead seemed to spotlight every faded patch on her clothes. She looked trapped, torn between finishing her laundry and grabbing her kids and running right out of there. Their laughter bounced off the ugly walls, hitting her over and over. She kept her gaze glued to that spinning window, trying to lose herself in the tumble of clothes. But the insults kept coming. "Look at those ratty shoes," one sneered. "Bet she got 'em out of a donation bin." Her fingers trembled as she sorted through more laundry. Every worn t-shirt, every frayed sock suddenly felt like proof that she'd failed her kids. She tried pretending she didn't hear them, but they weren't letting up. "Maybe if you worked a real job instead of being lazy, you could afford new clothes," another one chimed in, sending his buddies into hysterics. Her son, Tommy, shrank in his seat, trying to disappear. Sarah pretended to stare at her phone, but the screen was black. She just didn't want them to look at her. "Mommy can't even buy you new clothes," one of the guys yelled at the kids. "That's just sad." Linda's hands shook even harder as she grabbed the next load. A single sock fell to the floor, and when she bent to pick it up, they erupted in mean laughter again. Her cheeks went bright red. She looked like she wanted to defend herself, defend her kids, but fear pinned her in place. What if it only made things worse? You could practically hear her thinking. "Bet she can't even afford the machine fee," the first guy said. "Maybe we should start a collection for her." They dug around in their pockets, pretending to offer coins. It was cruel, childish, and designed to humiliate her in the most public way possible. Linda swallowed hard, trying to choke back tears. The weight of overdue bills, rising rent, and now this humiliation pushed down on her so hard she looked like she couldn't take a full breath. She glanced at her kids. Sarah's lip trembled. Tommy's face was stiff with anger and shame. Seeing them like that broke something in Linda. She had tried so hard to shield them from all the struggles they were facing. Then one of the bullies started again. Maybe if she wasn't such a failure of a mother, but Linda didn't even hear the rest. Everything blurred. Her ears rang, her vision swam, and she folded a t-shirt twice without remembering if she'd already folded it. The bullies' voices rose louder, each insult more confident now that she wasn't fighting back. Linda felt boxed in, like the walls were closing around her. She knew she couldn't just grab her kids and run. The machines still held her close, and leaving now would feel like admitting those punks were right about her. But staying meant standing there and taking every ugly word they threw at her, and watching her kids curl into themselves a little more each time. In the middle of that heavy, sinking feeling, a new noise crept into the edges of the room. Low at first, almost like distant thunder. Then it grew, deeper, louder, until it felt like it was shaking the whole building. It wasn't one or two engines, it was a whole pack rolling up outside. The windows began to vibrate from the rumble, the glass shivering in the frames. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz differently. The bullies froze mid-insult, their smirks fading as they looked around at one another. One guy edged toward the window, squinting through the streaky glass as if trying to make sense of the sound. Meanwhile, Linda kept her head down, her fingers shaking while she folded another soft, worn t-shirt. Her cheeks were burning. Her chest was tight. She wished the floor would just open up and swallow her so she wouldn't have to stand there in front of her kids, humiliated and small. The harsh words still echoed in her ears, making her feel like she couldn't take a full breath. Jake and Sarah pressed closer to her sides, their eyes wide and nervous. Then the engines hit a peak, loud enough to drown out everything, and suddenly the noise cut off all at once. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. Even the washing machine sounded quieter. Linda's hands went still against the warm laundry. Her heart slammed against her ribs, fast and uneven. That's when the door burst open with a force that rattled the bell above it. The sharp jangle echoed around the bright, sterile room, making everyone jump. And then it happened, almost like a scene playing out in slow motion. They came in waves, bikers, dozens at first, then more behind them, and then more, until it didn't seem physically possible for that many people to fit inside a laundromat. Their heavy boots pounded against the tile in a steady, thunderous rhythm that reminded me of soldiers marching in formation. The leather on their jackets reflected the harsh lights overhead, gleaming like polished armor. The entire room changed the second they stepped inside. The air felt thicker, sharper, more alive. The bullies who had been spitting insults minutes earlier suddenly plastered themselves against the washing machines. The color drained right out of their faces. Whatever swagger they'd had evaporated like water on a hot sidewalk. Each biker walked in tall and steady, carrying a kind of silent authority you didn't have to be told to respect. They lined up near the entrance, forming a wall of leather, boots, and confidence that made the laundromat shrink with every passing second. Linda's kids clutched her arms tighter, their little fingers digging into her sleeves. She could feel their fear, but somehow she didn't feel afraid herself. Not even a little. There was something different about these bikers, something in the way they held themselves. Instead of danger, she felt protected. Finally, the steady line of bikers stopped coming, but the silence afterward was electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. The bullies were huddled into a corner now, their tough guy routine gone completely. The loudest one, the ringleader, kept opening and closing his mouth like a fish pulled out of water, but no sound came out. That's when she stepped forward. A woman emerged from the crowd of bikers, tall, strong, moving with the kind of confidence that told you she'd handled worse situations than this one. Her boots clicked in a calm, controlled rhythm as she walked toward the bullies. Her face stayed composed, but her eyes held a fire that didn't need shouting or threats to make itself known. She stopped just a few feet from the young men, who seemed to shrink even smaller under her gaze. She didn't yell. She didn't lift a hand. She didn't need to. Her presence carried its own kind of weight, and when she finally spoke, it cut through the room like a knife through soft bread. "You're done here," she said, calm but unmistakably final. Her voice wasn't loud, but the authority in it made the bullies flinch like they'd been struck. The silence that followed felt thick and heavy, hanging over everyone as Linda watched those punks scramble to the door. They practically tripped over one another trying to get out, their bravado left in a pile on the floor behind them. Linda's heart was still pounding. She had to grab the edge of the washing machine just to steady herself. The flood of bikers into the laundromat had happened so fast she felt dizzy, torn between huge relief and the uncertainty of what came next. Through all the leather jackets and big personalities, one person stood out. The same woman who'd spoken. She carried herself like someone people naturally followed. The other bikers parted for her without a word as she made her way toward Linda. Her boots made soft, steady clicks across the linoleum. Jake and Sarah watched her with huge eyes, their phones forgotten. As the woman came closer, her stern face softened into something gentler, something warm. "Hey there," she said, her voice soft and surprisingly kind. The difference between this tone and the steel-edged authority she'd used on the bullies was almost startling. Linda felt her shoulders loosen just a little. Her grip on the machine eased. The woman, Rita, as she'd soon introduce herself, stepped closer, but not too close. Just enough to be comforting, not intimidating. A small, reassuring smile touched her face, changing her whole expression. "You okay?" she asked, and the concern in her voice was real, not forced, not for show. Linda nodded shakily. Her throat felt tight, like her voice was stuck behind fear and exhaustion. She looked at her kids first, and seeing that they were more fascinated than scared helped something inside her unclench. "Yes," she finally whispered. Then she cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes, thank you." The woman's smile grew a bit. "I'm Rita," she said, offering her hand. Linda took it. Rita's grip was firm, steady, but gentle. Strong in a way that felt protective, never threatening. "Those guys won't bother you again," Rita said quietly. She glanced back toward the door, making sure the bullies were truly gone. All around them, the other bikers spread out through the laundromat. A couple pretended to study the vending machines. Some leaned against the walls like they'd just stopped in for a casual visit, but every single one of them stayed alert, forming an invisible shield around Linda and her kids. She hadn't realized just how tight and tense her whole body had been, until she felt some of that tension finally start to ease. Rita leaned in a little, her voice dropping into something softer, something just between the two of them. "Listen," she said gently, "I'm not trying to pry into your business, but I know that look. You're carrying more than anyone should have to carry on their own, aren't you?" Linda didn't answer right away. She just stared at the floor like the words had knocked the wind out of her. So Rita kept going. "We're part of a group that helps single moms around here," she said. "We've been doing this a long time." Something shifted in Linda's chest right then, like a small door opening inside her that she didn't even realize had been locked shut for months. Relief wasn't the right word. It was too small. It was more like the first spark of hope after a long stretch of darkness. Her eyes stung, tears gathering, but she forced herself to blink them away. She didn't want to fall apart in front of all these strangers. "We've got resources," Rita said quietly, her voice warm in a way that cut straight through the cold edges of the moment. "Connections, folks who care, no strings, just community taking care of community." Those words washed over Linda like warm water after a winter storm. It made her throat tighten with a sudden, unexpected wave of emotion. She honestly couldn't remember the last time someone offered help without expecting something in return. The simple kindness of it, especially after the hell she'd just lived through, hit her so hard she almost felt her knees give out. She stood frozen in place, hands still gripping the laundry basket, staring at the sea of leather-clad bikers who filled nearly every inch of the laundromat. Jake and Sarah huddled against her sides, but to her surprise, they weren't scared. They were curious, eyes wide, like they'd stepped into some kind of movie. The harsh fluorescent lights bounced off silver chains and metal patches, making the bikers' jackets shimmer like armor. That's when another woman stepped forward, older, with steel-gray hair braided neatly down her back. Her face looked weathered from years of both joy and hard living, the kind of face that carried stories in every crease. "You okay?" she asked, her voice wrapping around Linda like a blanket pulled straight from a warm dryer. The contrast between her tough appearance and the gentleness in her tone made Linda blink. Linda nodded a little, setting down her basket though her hands still trembled. Words refused to come, stuck somewhere between her heart and her throat. She looked down at her kids who were now sitting straighter, watching everything with wide-eyed wonder instead of fear. The older woman stepped closer with slow, deliberate movements, like she was approaching a startled animal she didn't want to spook. "I'm Rita," she said, extending a hand decorated with silver rings. "And these," she added with a small gesture toward the crowd behind her, "are my family." Linda reached out and shook her hand. The grip was firm, but gentle, steadying in a way that made the room feel a little less chaotic. Linda," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, "thank you for what you did." Rita's eyes creased into a warm smile, softening every hard line in her face. She glanced toward the door, making sure the bullies had truly fled. Outside, the parking lot was quiet except for the steady low rumble of idling motorcycles. "Those boys won't bother you again," Rita said, turning back to Linda. Then she studied her face, really studied it, in that knowing way only someone who'd been through their own storms could. "We didn't just happen to be nearby," she added softly. "We help single moms in this community." Linda's heart stumbled at that. How did she know I'm a single mother? She wondered. But then, maybe it was obvious. The worn clothes. The way she counted quarters like they were dollar bills. The protective stance she took between her kids and the world. "We've walked similar roads," Rita continued. "Most of us have. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say yes when someone reaches out a hand." A warmth grew in Linda's chest again, something tender and unfamiliar. Hope, she realized. Real hope. Not the kind that hurts when you think about it, but the kind that grows. Her eyes filled with tears, but for once they weren't from fear or frustration. For the first time in years, they were from something that felt a lot like relief. The washing machine behind her chimed, signaling the end of its cycle. The normal sound felt almost strange in the middle of such an extraordinary moment. Linda glanced around the room again. The bikers who'd once stormed in like an army now looked more like a community. People who'd known struggle and decided to help others climb out of it. She began, but her voice cracked. She swallowed and tried again. "I don't know what to say." Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed as she and Rita stood near the front counter. Linda folded a faded t-shirt with shaking hands, trying to make sense of the kindness she'd just been offered. The other bikers had spread out, some sitting in plastic chairs, others leaning against machines, but all of them still quietly protective, like a shield around her family. "I know it feels like a lot," Rita said softly. "But we've been doing this for years, helping families who just need a little extra support." Linda pressed her lips together, focusing on the shirt in her hands. Jake and Sarah sat close by, sneaking glances at the bikers with a mix of awe and fascination. "We run a small charity," Rita said, pulling a business card from her jacket. "Nothing fancy, just folks helping folks. School supplies, groceries, sometimes job leads." She set the card on the counter. Linda's fingers brushed the edge of it, but she didn't pick it up. Accepting help wasn't something she knew how to do. Years of doing everything alone had trained her to expect disappointment the moment she reached out. She tried again, but the words stuck. Rita nodded like she'd heard them anyway. "You don't have to decide right now. The card's there when you need it." She motioned toward the rest of the bikers. "Every one of us has seen hard times. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else help carry the load." Linda looked at her kids again, saw how tired they were, how worn down life had made them. She thought of the rent due next week, the electric bill sitting unpaid on the kitchen counter, the holes in Jake's shoes she kept promising to fix. "I'm not looking for charity," she whispered, barely audible over the low thrum of the dryers. "It's not charity," Rita said firmly. "It's community, no strings, no guilt, just people who've been there, reaching back to help someone else forward." A washer buzzed loudly beside them, making Linda jump. She hurried over to transfer the wet clothes to a dryer, grateful for a few seconds to breathe and gather the scattered pieces of her emotions. Rita didn't rush her. She just stood there by the counter, steady and patient, like someone who understood exactly how heavy decisions like this could feel. When Linda finally came back from the dryers, Rita was still waiting in that same calm stance, arms relaxed, expression soft. "Just think about it," she said quietly. "That's all I'm asking." Linda gave a small nod and finally slipped the business card into her pocket. The thin piece of paper felt strangely heavy against the worn denim, like it carried a weight far bigger than the card itself. She gathered her laundry and motioned for her kids to follow, still unable to fully meet Rita's eyes. "Thank you," she murmured. "For earlier." Rita's smile warmed the whole space. "Take care of yourself, Linda. And remember, you're not alone." Walking out to her car, Linda felt different. Not lighter. Life hadn't magically changed, but steadier somehow. Her kids followed close, their footsteps echoing in the cool evening air. The problems waiting at home were still there, but something inside her had shifted just a little. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not as a burden or a failure, but as a person worthy of help. The business card in her pocket pressed against her leg with every step. A small reminder that maybe life didn't have to stay this way forever. Later that day, Linda sat in her cramped kitchen, the only sound the steady tick-tick-tick of the old wall clock. Sunlight came through the window in long streaks across the table, where a mountain of bills lay scattered like fallen leaves. She picked up one envelope, then another. Her hands trembled as she tried sorting them into piles, urgent, really urgent and desperate. The electric bill glared up in bold red letters. Final notice. The water bill wasn't any kinder. She rubbed her temples, trying to push back the headache that had been brewing since dawn. She opened the calculator app on her phone again, typing in numbers she already knew wouldn't stretch far enough. No matter how she sliced them, there just wasn't enough. "Maybe if I skip groceries this week," she muttered, scribbling on her old notepad. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't reality. Kids had to eat, and the pantry shelves were already looking bare. The kitchen felt smaller than usual, like the walls were leaning in. Her cup of coffee sat forgotten and cold, untouched since the moment she sat down to face the math she'd been avoiding all month. Through the doorway, she could see her kids sitting in the living room. The TV was off. They were careful about the electric bill now, but they sat there quietly, bored and trying their best not to show it. Her daughter was reading the same old book again. Her son tugged at a loose thread on his too-worn jeans. Linda swallowed hard. They deserved so much better. Yesterday's humiliation at the laundromat still burned under her skin. Even though the bikers had stood up for her, it didn't erase the sting of those insults, or the reality that those boys had spoken out loud what she'd feared silently for months. Her phone buzzed suddenly, jolting her. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Her stomach tightened. Unknown numbers never brought good news these days. She answered anyway. "Hello? Mrs. Thompson," a sharp voice replied. "This is Mark Davidson, your landlord." Her heart dropped to her shoes. "Yes, Mr. Davidson?" "I'm calling to remind you that rent is due in 2 days," he said. His voice was clipped and stern. "And to be absolutely clear, there will be no grace period this month. We've been lenient already." The rest of his words drowned under the rushing sound in her ears. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "I understand," she whispered. "Good, full payment by Friday." The call ended with a hard, final click. Linda set the phone down like it was a fragile piece of glass, or maybe she felt like the fragile one. She looked at her kids. They were watching her now, their young faces holding worry they shouldn't have to carry. They had no poker faces yet. They couldn't hide the frustration, the fear, or the exhaustion. Her daughter's eyes said everything. "I'm tired of second-hand clothes, tired of missing out, tired of living like this." Her son didn't even ask for new shoes anymore, even though the soles were peeling apart. The familiar wave of failure crashed over Linda again. Cold, harsh, unforgiving. She had tried so hard to hold everything together, but every month felt like trying to plug holes in a sinking ship with her bare hands. The next morning, the laundromat greeted her with the same humming machines and the same bright fluorescent lights, but everything felt heavier. She pushed open the glass door with a load of laundry in her arms. She hadn't slept much. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. The usual morning crowd was sparse. Just two older ladies chatting softly while folding sheets. The hum of machines filled the space like a dull ache. Linda set down her basket in her usual spot. Even the simple act of sorting clothes felt like climbing a hill today. The humiliation from yesterday still clung to her, mixed with the landlord's cold threat echoing in her ears. She was halfway through separating darks from lights when a calm, familiar voice broke the silence. "Good morning, Linda." She jolted slightly, turning around. Rita stood near the entrance. No leather jacket this time, just a simple denim one. The morning sun softened her features and she wore a warm smile that reached her eyes, deepening the laugh lines at their corners. Linda froze, hand hovering over a pile of clothes. "Oh, good morning," she managed, barely above a whisper. She hadn't expected to see Rita again, certainly not this soon, and definitely not in the soft morning light, looking so different, gentler, almost comforting. Rita crossed the room with those steady, confident steps of hers, her boots tapping softly against the linoleum. She carried herself the same way she had at the laundromat, calm, sure, and with that quiet kind of authority people don't need to announce. But this morning there was something a little softer in her eyes. "I was hoping I'd catch you here," she said, reaching into the pocket of her denim jacket. She pulled out a colorful flyer, the corners creased from riding around with her. "We're holding a fundraiser this weekend," she explained, holding it out. "It's for single moms like you." Linda's eyes dropped to the paper, but she didn't take it right away. The flyer trembled slightly in Rita's weathered hand, and for a moment Linda noticed a small scar across Rita's knuckles, like a reminder of a life lived through hard times. The flyer itself showed families smiling, kids playing games, and motorcycles lined up like a parade. It looked hopeful, safe, nothing like what she'd imagined. Linda started, but the words caught in her throat. Gratitude and embarrassment tangled together, tightening her chest. Rita didn't push the flyer any closer. She just stood there like a boulder in a river, steady, patient, and completely unfazed by Linda's hesitation. Sunlight from the laundromat windows caught the silver strands in her hair and made them shine. After a long moment that was probably only a few seconds, Linda finally took the flyer. It felt warm from being in Rita's pocket. She scanned the words, location, time, activities, but the letters wavered slightly through the tears she was fighting back. She pressed the flyer against her chest and gave a small nod. Inside her, pride battled with desperation, both of them fighting for space. But underneath all that noise was something small yet unmistakable, a spark of possibility, a tiny flame of hope. Maybe this wasn't just a flyer. Maybe it was a lifeline. Behind them, the washing machines kept their steady rhythm, reminding her that life was still moving forward, second by second. A few hours later, Linda stood behind the counter at the convenience store, her fingers flying across the cash register. Her mind was running even faster than her hands. The after-work rush kept her busy, but her thoughts kept drifting home, to the bills piled on the kitchen table, the final notices, the rent due in 2 days. She glanced at the clock. 5:45 p.m., just 15 minutes left. "That'll be $12.50, she said, offering the customer a tired smile. As she handed back the change, her eyes dropped toward the flyer tucked inside her purse beneath the counter. The fundraiser started at 7. The thought of going made her stomach flutter. She'd never attended anything like that, never asked for help from strangers. But she kept seeing Rita's steady eyes. That kindness wasn't the kind you imagined. It was real. When her shift ended, she rushed home to grab her kids. "Mom, do we really have to go?" her daughter asked, not looking up from her phone. "Yes, sweetheart," Linda said. "Just give it a chance, okay?" The community center parking lot was packed with motorcycles when they arrived. Music drifted out the open doors, mixed with the smell of barbecue and the sound of laughter. Linda froze at the entrance, her kids tucked close behind her. "Linda," Rita called from across the room. She wore her leather vest again, layered over a black t-shirt, but her smile lit her face like sunlight. "I'm so glad you made it." Inside, the community center had been transformed. Tables lined the walls, covered with food and drinks. Bright decorations hung from the ceiling. Bikers mingled with families, laughing, serving food, talking like old friends. It wasn't anything like Linda had imagined. "Come," Rita said gently, touching Linda's arm. "There are some people I want you to meet." They walked to a table where several women sat chatting. "This is Sarah," Rita said, introducing a woman with curly red hair. "And this is Maria and Jennifer. They're all part of our community." "Hi," Linda said softly, as Rita pulled out a chair for her. "First time at one of these?" Sarah asked with a kind smile. Linda nodded. "I almost turned around in the parking lot my first time," Sarah admitted. "Me too," Maria chimed in with a laugh. "But look at us now. These events, they're like family gatherings." Linda listened as they shared their stories. Stories that sounded painfully familiar. Sarah had lost her job and struggled to raise 3 kids. Maria had escaped an abusive marriage with nothing but her car. Jennifer worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. "The bikers helped me find a better job," Sarah said, nodding toward a tall man in a leather vest who was serving hot dogs. "Tom over there. He owns a construction company. Gave me a shot when nobody else would." Linda looked across the room. Her kids, who'd been shy at first, were now playing games with other children. A few bikers cheered them on from the sidelines, their tough exteriors replaced with grins and encouraging shouts. "We all thought we were alone," Jennifer said, resting a comforting hand on Linda's. "But that's the thing about this group. They show you that you're not." Linda felt something loosen deep inside her chest, a knot she'd carried for years without realizing it. Looking around at the room full of leather jackets and struggling families, she finally saw what she hadn't dared to see before. Hope. Real, grounded human hope. These people didn't judge her. They didn't pity her. They understood her. They offered help without strings. They carried strength in unity. For the first time in years, Linda felt like she could breathe. She wasn't just a single mother fighting to survive. She was becoming part of something bigger. A week later, Linda pushed open the heavy laundromat door again, laundry bag slung over her shoulder. The fundraiser flyer, now soft and wrinkled from being handled so much, sat tucked inside her jacket pocket. The familiar hum of the machines filled the air, but the laundromat didn't feel the same. It wasn't just a chore stop anymore. It had become a milestone, a dividing line in her life. As she loaded clothes into the machine, her mind wandered back to the fundraiser, the food, the laughter, the kindness, the unexpected sense of belonging. Those bikers, those intimidating people, had turned out to be some of the most genuine souls she'd ever met. And for the first time in a long time, Linda felt something she almost didn't recognize. She felt like maybe her life could actually change, The bell above the laundromat door chimed, and Linda glanced up just in time to see Rita step inside. Her leather jacket caught the fluorescent lights, giving it a soft silver sheen. Their eyes met, and Rita offered a small, knowing nod. Linda felt a faint smile tug at her lips as she nodded back. Rita crossed the distance with that same easy confidence she always carried, her boots tapping lightly against the tile. "Good to see you again," she said, leaning one elbow against a washing machine. "How you holding up?" "I'm managing," Linda replied, trying to make her voice sound stronger than she felt. She fed a few quarters into the machine, the clink of metal filling the space between them. Rita crossed her arms in a relaxed way. "I was about to grab some coffee at the diner next door," she said casually. "Why don't you join me when you're done?" "My treat." Linda hesitated. Her instinct was to say no, to keep her distance, keep her pride, keep her problems tucked away where nobody had to see them. But something steady in Rita's gaze softened her resistance. "Sure," Linda heard herself say, that would be nice." An hour later, with her clothes folded neatly in her bag, Linda slid into a worn vinyl booth across from Rita. The diner was quiet. Just a handful of customers scattered around. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with the warm smell of pie from the kitchen. It felt homey in a way Linda hadn't felt in years. Rita wrapped her hands around her steaming mug. "So," she said, once their drinks arrived, "how are things really going?" That simple question, asked gently, without pressure, hit Linda harder than any insult those bullies had thrown the day before. Something in Rita's voice slipped under her guard. "I'm scared," Linda admitted. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She stared into her coffee, watching tiny swirls of steam drift up. "Everything is falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it." The words tumbled out before she had the chance to pull them back. "My job at the grocery store? It's not enough. The bills keep stacking up, and I'm one missed payment away from losing our apartment." Rita listened closely, her face thoughtful, not pitying. Linda appreciated that more than she could put into words. "And my kids," Linda's voice tightened, "they deserve better than this. They shouldn't have to worry about grocery money or whether we'll have to move again." When she finally lifted her eyes from the mug, Rita was looking at her with quiet understanding. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush in with cliches or easy answers. She just let Linda be honest, maybe for the first time in years. Rita took a slow sip of her coffee and set the mug down with careful intent. "I think," she said slowly, "there might be a way we can help each other. Something you probably haven't thought about." She leaned forward slightly, her fingers wrapped around the mug, tapping rhythmically against the ceramic. The diner buzzed with afternoon chatter, but at their booth, time felt slower. "You know," Rita continued, her voice soft but steady, "our charity does more than fundraisers. We're always looking for part-time volunteers for community outreach." She let the words settle before going on. "If you're interested, we can help with your bills, and we can give you steady income, something reliable." Linda froze, her spoon clinking against the cup as her hand stopped mid-stir. Her eyes widened, and she felt her breath catch. The offer hung between them, big, unexpected, almost unreal. Linda began, but the rest of the sentence dissolved into silence. She dropped her gaze, watching the cream swirl in her coffee, afraid to look hopeful, afraid to be disappointed again. "That's very kind of you," she said finally, "but I don't know if I can accept that." Rita didn't react with frustration. Her expression stayed patient, calm. "What's holding you back, Linda?" Linda shifted in her seat, shoulders tightening. It's just, I've always done everything on my own. I'm not comfortable taking handouts. The words felt heavy. They cost her something just to say them out loud. This isn't a handout, Rita said firmly, leaning back a little. It's a job. Real work, real pay. The fact that it comes with the community behind you, that's just how we operate. Linda looked up, meeting Rita's steady gaze. There was no pity there, just respect. Genuine, grounded respect. It softened something inside her that had been locked tight for years. We help people because we've all been there, Rita added. No strings, no judgment. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept a helping hand. Linda traced the rim of her coffee cup, thinking about the impossible math of her bills, her landlord's threats, her kids' worn-out shoes. Pride battled with reality inside her. She'd spent years being the one who never asked for anything. I appreciate the offer, she said at last, her voice quiet but controlled. I really do. I just need time to think. Her smile was small but sincere. Of course, Rita said, nodding. Take as much time as you need. She reached into her vest and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. When you're ready, if you're ready, call me. Linda picked up the card, feeling the embossed letters under her thumb. The charity's name, Rita's number. It felt like both a lifeline and a leap of faith. A chance she didn't know if she could take, but one she desperately needed. Thank you, Linda whispered, slipping the card into her purse. I'll think about it. Later that week, Linda pushed open the laundromat's heavy glass door. The bell chimed above her, the familiar sound echoing through the empty space. Early sunlight streamed through the big front windows, casting long shadows across the rows of humming machines. She breathed in the familiar scent. Detergent, fabric softener, that strange metallic smell from the machines. For some reason, it comforted her. Maybe because it was routine, predictable, safe. Her footsteps echoed softly as she walked to her usual spot, her laundry bag weighing on her shoulder, and Rita's business card weighing even heavier in her purse. Linda moved toward the third washer from the end, the reliable one that never made that strange clicking sound during the spin cycle. With practiced ease, she began sorting her clothes across the folding table. Darks here, lights there, delicates in a separate pile. The routine steadied her a little, gave her something simple to focus on while her mind tried to fight off the usual flood of worries. Rent, bills, groceries, the endless battle to stay afloat. The morning sun warmed her shoulders through the big front window. For a brief moment, the peace in the quiet laundromat settled over her like a soft blanket. No bullies, no harsh words. Just her, the hum of washers, and a few minutes of calm. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, her workplace, the grocery store she'd worked at for 8 months. Her heart lurched as she answered. Hello, Linda, it's Mark. Her manager's voice sounded tight, tired. I need to tell you something important. Linda froze with a handful of clothes suspended over the washer. Something in his tone made her stomach twist. The corporate office made their final decision this morning, he said. The store's shutting down. We've got 2 weeks before the doors close for good. Her hands trembled. The clothes slipped into the washer with a soft thud. The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She had to grab the edge of the machine just to stay upright. I'm sorry, Mark went on, his voice fading in and out. We're trying to help folks transfer to other locations, but the nearest store is 30 miles away. She barely heard the rest. Her mind was already racing, calculating and failing to calculate. Without that job, her already stretched budget would snap. That paycheck had been the thin line between making rent or not. It covered groceries, gas. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept them from drowning completely. "Thank you for letting me know," Linda whispered. The steadiness in her voice surprised even her. After the call ended, she just stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear. The laundromat felt suddenly smaller, the hum of machines almost mocking in their normalcy. Nothing around her had changed. The faded posters, the rows of old washers, the sunlight still streaming through the windows. But inside, everything had shifted off its axis. She walked to the window on autopilot. Outside, life just kept going. Cars drove by. People walked their dogs. A delivery truck unloaded boxes at the cafe next door. Ordinary life. But inside, Linda felt like the ground had dropped out beneath her. Her thoughts spiraled, her shoulders sagged. She stared out the window, unmoving, while worry pressed down on her like a physical weight. The dust motes dancing in the sunlight moved more than she did. The next morning, Linda sat in her car outside the laundromat, gripping the steering wheel. Through the window, she could see Rita sitting inside with a cup of coffee, just like she'd been doing most mornings lately. Waiting. Watching over her, in a way. Linda took a deep breath, then stepped out of the car. The news of the store closing still sat heavy on her shoulders. The bell chimed when she opened the door. Rita looked up, her expression warm, gentle but perceptive. Linda had the feeling Rita could read her face like an open book. "You look like you could use some coffee," Rita said, pulling out a chair at a small table near the front. "Come sit." Linda slid into the chair, her keys twisting nervously between her fingers. "The store is closing," she blurted out. Her voice cracked. "I got the call yesterday. They're shutting down at the end of the month." Rita's face didn't fill with pity, just understanding. Calm, steady understanding. She took a slow sip of her coffee and let Linda's words settle into the quiet hum of the room. "I've been thinking," Rita said finally, setting her mug down. "We could get you a job at the shop, the repair place." Linda blinked. "The motorcycle shop? Max's repair?" Rita nodded. "It's not just bikes, we do general auto work too. Decent pay, flexible hours." She leaned in a little. "Would you want to take a look?" Linda's stomach nodded with hesitation. She pictured oil-stained floors, loud machines, a world she knew nothing about. "I don't know anything about motorcycles," she admitted. "You don't need to," Rita assured her. "We need someone at the front desk. Appointments, paperwork, calls. Max has been complaining about the schedule mess for months." Linda twisted her fingers in her lap. Stepping into their world, the leather, the chrome, the biker culture, felt overwhelming. But these were the same people who had shown her nothing but kindness. More kindness than she'd seen in years. "I suppose I could take a look," she said softly. Rita's face brightened. "Let's go then. Max is always there early." 20 minutes later, Linda followed Rita's car into an industrial area she'd driven past countless times but never visited. The repair shop was bigger than she'd imagined. Clean exterior, well-kept parking lot. Several polished motorcycles sparkled in the morning sun near the entrance. The bell above the shop door chimed when they walked in, and Linda was greeted by the mixed scent of coffee and motor oil. "Hey, Rita," a few voices called. 3 bikers Linda recognized from the laundromat looked up, grinning warmly. "This is Linda," Rita said proudly. "She might be joining us at the front desk." To Linda's surprise, their faces lit up like someone had just announced a holiday. "About time," one of them said. "Max's filing system is driving us insane." Another stepped forward, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I'm Tom," he said, with a gentle voice that didn't match his rugged exterior. "Let me show you around." Linda followed him through the shop, and slowly, very slowly, her anxiety began to ease. The place was busy but organized. Friendly greetings came from every direction. The chaos she expected wasn't there. When they reached the front office, she stopped short. It was normal. Comfortable, even. A desk with a working computer. A bulletin board with notes. A coffee maker humming quietly. A wall of neatly labeled key hooks. It looked nothing like the intimidating biker world she'd imagined. It turned out the front office at the shop wasn't all that different from the cramped little office at the grocery store. Just with more chrome, more leather, and the steady thrum of engines in the background. "What do you think?" Rita asked, watching Linda quietly as she took it all in. The next morning, Linda pulled her aging car into the parking lot of Mike's repair shop. Her hands trembled around the steering wheel. She'd woken before sunrise, ironed her cleanest shirt twice, and still felt like she wasn't ready. The sun glinted off the rows of polished bikes lined up outside, each one shining like it belonged in a magazine. Through the wide garage doors, she could see mechanics already at work, tools clinking against metal. The familiar rumble of motorcycles filled the air, only now, instead of making her nervous like before, the sound brought a strange sense of comfort, a rhythm she was beginning to recognize. "Right on time," a deep voice called. A tall man with kind eyes and streaks of gray in his hair walked over, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. "I'm Mike," he said. "Rita's told me all about you." Linda managed a shy smile. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Mike's laugh was warm and easy. "We all start somewhere. Come on, let me show you around." Inside, the shop felt even bigger. Motorcycles in various stages of repair filled the workspace. Tools hung neatly from hooks, and the air smelled of oil, steel, and the fresh pot of coffee brewing in the corner. "First things first," Mike said, stopping at a large workbench. "Every good mechanic needs tools." He pointed at a simple but sturdy toolkit laid out on the table. "These are yours now." Linda brushed her hand across the smooth metal of a wrench. "I don't know anything about fixing bikes," she admitted, cheeks warming. "That's why I'm here," Mike said, pulling up 2 stools. "We'll start with the basics." For the next hour, he walked her through each tool, its name, its job, how to handle it safely. His hands were rough from years of work, but gentle as he guided her through checking oil levels, adjusting chain tension, and learning the feel of a machine. "See this?" he said, pointing at the engine. "This is the heart of the bike. Respect it, and it'll treat you right." Linda listened intently, soaking up every word. When he finally handed her a wrench and walked her through her first oil change, her hands didn't shake. Not once. Throughout the morning, mechanics stopped by to introduce themselves. Friendly nods, warm smiles, quick stories about the shop. No judgment, no cold stares, just people welcoming her in. By lunchtime, she'd completed a basic maintenance check, with Mike hovering like a proud teacher. "Not bad," he said, inspecting her work. "You've got good instincts." Her shirt was smudged with grease, her hands dirty, but she felt taller somehow. Stronger, proud. As the afternoon rolled on, the sounds that had once intimidated her, the engine revs, the clink of tools, the loud chatter, now blended into something almost musical. Purposeful. Alive. When closing time came, Linda looked down at her grease-covered hands and smiled. They were the hands of someone who'd worked, learned, tried something new. The hands of someone changing her life. "Same time tomorrow?" Mike asked. Linda nodded, warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in weeks, the weight she carried didn't feel quite so suffocating. Things were finally, maybe, starting to look up. That evening, Linda sat at her kitchen table, sorting through paperwork for her new job when her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Mark, her ex-husband. She thought about letting it go to voicemail, but she knew better. Ignoring him only made things worse. "Hello?" she said softly. "What's this I hear about you hanging around with bikers?" Mark snapped, his voice sharp and accusing. "Are you out of your mind, Linda?" Her fingers tightened around the phone. "They're good people, Mark. They've been helping me." "Helping you?" he barked. "You call that helping? Running around with a motorcycle gang while our kids watch?" "It's not like that," Linda said quickly, twisting a pen between her fingers. "I'm working at their repair shop now." "A repair shop?" His voice shot up. "You're working at a biker shop. Have you completely lost it? What kind of environment is that for our children?" Linda's chest tightened like someone had cinched a belt around her ribs. "The environment is fine," she said quietly. "Everyone there has been nothing but respectful." "Well, I'm not having my kids near that crowd," he snapped. "You need to end this. Now. The job, the charity, all of it." "Or what?" Linda whispered. "Or I'll take the kids." Her breath caught. Her stomach fell. "I've got a damn good lawyer," Mark said coldly. "What do you think a judge will say when I tell them you've got our kids around a biker gang?" "They're not a gang," Linda said through tears. "They help people. I don't care what they call themselves. You've got until the end of the week to cut ties, or I'm filing for full custody." Then he hung up. Linda set the phone down, shaking. The shop job was finally helping her catch up. The bikers were becoming like family. They'd given her hope. But could she risk losing her children? Her phone buzzed again. Rita. Linda almost didn't answer, but something inside her said she should. "Linda?" Rita's warm voice came through. "You okay? Mike said you seemed off when you left today." That concern, real, unforced, broke something open inside Linda. The words spilled out in a frantic rush. Mark's call, his accusations, his threats. When she finished, Rita's voice dropped low and steady. "Listen to me. You don't have to handle this alone," she said. "We've dealt with situations like this. We know lawyers. Good ones. People who understand what we do and why. But what if... No what ifs," Rita cut in gently but firmly. "You're part of our family now, and we take care of our own. Mark doesn't get to bully you with empty threats." Rita's certainty was so solid that Linda found herself believing it, even through the fear twisting in her gut. The next morning, standing in Rita's office at the shop, Linda dialed Mark's number with trembling hands. Each ring made her stomach twist tighter. "What do you want?" Mark snapped. "We need to talk, in person," Linda said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Tomorrow, noon, coffee shop on Main." A long pause. "Fine, but come alone." "I'll be there." She hung up before he could say anything else. Rita knocked on the door and slipped inside. "How'd it go?" "He agreed to meet," Linda said, sinking into a chair, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. "But I'm scared, Rita. What if he really follows through?" Rita pulled a chair up beside her. "You're not facing him alone," she said quietly. "We'll be there, not to intimidate him, just to show him you're not on your own." The next day, Linda arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. She took a shaky breath as she walked inside. At nearby tables, scattered just enough not to draw attention, sat Rita, Mike, and two others Linda knew as Bear and Sarah. Their presence didn't make a scene. They didn't glare or puff up their chests. But Linda felt stronger. like she was wearing invisible armor. When Linda's ex-husband walked into the coffee shop, she instantly recognized that old swagger of his, the way he strutted like every room belonged to him the second he stepped inside. His eyes narrowed the moment he spotted Rita, Mike, Bear, and Sarah sitting at separate tables. Their presence clearly rattled him, even though they weren't doing anything but sipping their coffees. He sat down across from Linda anyway, leaning forward like a coiled snake. "I told you to come alone," he hissed. Linda took a slow, steady breath. "No," she said, meeting his gaze head-on. "You didn't tell me. You tried to order me, like you always did, but that's not how my life works anymore." His jaw tightened. "You think hanging around with these criminals makes you tough?" he muttered. "I'll take the kids. No judge will stop me." Linda kept her voice quiet but firm, like steel wrapped in velvet. "They're not criminals," she said. "They're business owners, community leaders. They run charities. They stepped up for me when you never did." Behind her, Rita and the others didn't move. They didn't need to. Their calm presence alone shifted the energy in the room. Linda's ex kept glancing at them, trying to assess how far he could push this. "You can't threaten me anymore," Linda continued, feeling her confidence grow in her chest like a rising tide. "I have a stable job, a support system, and paperwork, years of it, showing every time you skipped child support." His face reddened. She could see it in his eyes the moment he realized the power had shifted. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the fight was gone from his voice. "Yes, it is," Linda said. "Unless you want to explain to a judge why you're threatening the mother of your children for having a job and friends who care about her." He shot a final glare at the bikers before standing so fast his chair screeched. Then he stormed out. Linda didn't move for a moment. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her ears, but her spirit soared. She had done it. She had stood up to him. Finally. Rita walked over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Linda," she said softly. "Real good." Tears of relief prickled at Linda's eyes. After years of living in his shadow, she finally felt it lifting. She felt stronger, lighter, free. A few days later, Linda wiped her hands on a red shop rag, leaving dark streaks across the worn fabric. She stood in front of a Harley-Davidson that had come in that morning, inhaling the familiar scent of motor oil and leather. Mike had been teaching her the basics for weeks, but today felt different. Today she wasn't watching. Today she was doing. "You've got this," Mike said, standing a few feet back with his arms crossed, his expression warm and steady. "Remember what I told you about the carburetor." Linda nodded and took a deep breath. Her hands moved with a confidence she hadn't had on her first day. The tools no longer felt foreign. They felt like extensions of her own hands. She followed Mike's lesson step by step. Check the carburetor. Adjust the airflow. Tighten the bolts. "That's it," Mike said. "Nice and easy." A small group of bikers gathered near the entrance, watching with interest. Their quiet murmurs of approval floated through the shop. Linda blocked out everything but the motorcycle in front of her. This wasn't just a repair. This was proof to herself that she belonged here. She reached for the timing light, connected it properly, and made the final adjustments. The engine responded immediately, humming like a living thing. "Start her up," Mike said. Linda's heart hammered. She turned the key. The engine roared to life. Steady, strong, powerful. The shop erupted into cheers and applause. "Would you hear that?" one of the guys shouted. "Perfect!" Mike grinned and clapped Linda on the shoulder. "That's what I'm talking about. You just fixed your first bike solo." Linda stepped back, staring at the motorcycle in disbelief. Her hands were dirty. Her shirt was stained. but she felt like she could lift the whole world. Dave, the bike's owner, walked over, gave the engine a listen, and nodded with clear approval. "Sounds better than when I bought it," he said. "You've got a natural talent," he added, patting Mike on the back. "That's all Linda," Mike replied, pride shining in his voice. "She did the work." Warmth spread through Linda's chest, almost overwhelming. She remembered how terrified she'd been her first day, how heavy everything had felt. Now, surrounded by familiar faces, tools she understood, and a motorcycle she'd fixed with her own hands, it all felt right. By closing time, she was cleaning her tools and organizing her workspace like she'd been doing this job for years. Her movements were light despite the long day, the fulfillment of hard work carrying her like a wave. The bikers gave her fist bumps, thumbs up, and playful applause on her way out. These people weren't just co-workers, they were family. Linda pulled into her driveway just as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the small yard. The gravel crunched under her tires with a sound she'd heard 1,000 times, but tonight it felt different. Everything felt different. Her hands still had grease under the nails, but she smiled at the sight. Those marks weren't something to hide. They were a badge of pride. Through the window, she saw Tommy sprawled on the couch with homework spread across his lap, and Sarah at the kitchen table working on an art project. Warm yellow light bathed them both. Her heart swelled so full it almost hurt. The moment she stepped inside, both kids looked up. Linda dropped her bag by the door and opened her arms wide. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt like she was finally giving them the mother they deserved. "Come here, you two," I said, my voice catching with all the emotion I'd been holding inside. Tommy hopped up from the couch so quickly his math homework slid to the floor. Sarah pushed her chair back and hurried over. I wrapped both of them in a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of their shampoo, feeling their arms cling to me. These were the moments that made everything worth it. Every long night, every bill, every fight to keep us going. "Mom," Tommy said, wrinkling his nose but still hugging me tight, "you smell like motorcycles." A laugh burst out of me, real, full, and honest. It felt good. "That's because your mom is officially a motorcycle mechanic now." We moved to the couch and settled down together. The old springs groaned under us, but I swear it felt like the coziest seat in the whole world. "Really?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Did you actually fix one today?" I nodded, pride warming my voice. "I sure did, all by myself." I told them how Mike stood nearby while I diagnosed the carburetor issue, how he'd shown me exactly what to look for, how the engine purred like a kitten once everything was done right. "That's so cool, Mom," Tommy said, sitting up straighter. "None of my friends' moms know how to fix motorcycles." Sarah leaned her head against my shoulder. "Did you have to wear those big protective glasses like in the movies?" "I did," I said, smoothing her hair. "And heavy gloves, safety first, that's Mike's rule." I told them about the other bikers watching me work and how they cheered when the engine roared to life. Rita even took a picture of me with the bike afterward. "Can we see it?" they said in perfect unison. I pulled out my phone. There I was in the photo, standing next to the gleaming motorcycle, my face streaked with grease, but smiling like I hadn't smiled in years. "You look different, Mom," Sarah said softly. "Different how?" I asked. "Happy," she answered simply. "Like, really happy." Tears stung my eyes, but not the old tears, the heavy ones full of shame and worry. These were different, softer, brighter. Tommy chimed in. "I told Jake at school that you work with motorcycles now. He didn't believe me until I showed him the picture you sent me. He thinks you're awesome." I hugged them both tighter. Just a few months ago, I'd felt like a failure, standing in that laundromat being mocked by strangers. Now, my kids were looking at me with pride, real, shining pride. And for the first time, they weren't watching me simply survive. They were watching me thrive. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring down at the invitation in my hands. Thick cardstock, formal lettering, the charity's logo embossed at the top. I traced my fingers over the raised letters. "Would you be our guest speaker?" Rita had asked earlier at the shop. "Your story could help so many others." Now, alone in the quiet kitchen, the weight of that request settled over me. Public speaking had never been my strong suit. As a kid, I used to shake so badly during class presentations that my papers rattled. Even as an adult, the thought of a crowd made my stomach twist. In the living room, I could hear my kids laughing over their video game. Just a few months ago, I'd been drowning in bills, working hours that barely covered groceries, always tired, always worried. That life felt so far away now, it was almost like remembering a nightmare. The next morning, during our break at the shop, I found Rita. "I'll do it," I told her, my voice shakier than I wanted. Her whole face lit up. "That's wonderful, Linda. Just speak from your heart. That's all anyone needs." Over the next few days, I practiced whenever I had a minute. I wrote down key points on index cards, but every time I imagined all those faces looking up at me, my palms grew sweaty and my throat tightened. Before I knew it, the evening of the event arrived. The community center was packed. Single parents, volunteers, neighbors, and bikers in leather jackets whose smiles softened their tough exteriors. I sat in the front row clutching my index cards until the edges bent. Mike leaned down and whispered, "You've got this." Both kids smiled at me, and their confidence steadied me more than my own ever could. When Rita called my name, I forced myself to stand. My legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. The microphone looked huge and intimidating, but I took a deep breath, looked out at the crowd, and began. "6 months ago," I said, my voice trembling, "I stood in a laundromat feeling like the smallest person in the world." As I continued, my voice grew stronger. I told them about the bullies, about the day the bikers walked in, about the kindness that had flipped my entire life upside down. I spoke about learning trust again, about accepting help, about discovering I was stronger than I ever believed. "Community isn't just about living in the same neighborhood," I said. "It's about showing up for each other, lifting each other, believing in one another when we forget how." I talked about the repair shop, about fixing my first motorcycle, about how my kids looked at me now, with pride instead of worry. "The bikers didn't just help with my problems," I said. "They reminded me I wasn't alone, that asking for help isn't weakness, and that sometimes the toughest-looking people have the kindest hearts." When I finished, the entire room erupted into applause. I blinked through tears as I saw my kids stand and cheer. The bikers were on their feet too, smiling warmly. A few days later, I found myself back at the laundromat. The familiar jingle of the bell rang as I pushed open the door, laundry basket balanced on my hip. But everything felt different now. My steps were lighter, my shoulders straight. My kids followed behind me, chatting about their school day instead of shrinking into themselves. The harsh fluorescent lights were the same, the hum of machines unchanged. But as I loaded the washer, something in me felt new, renewed, steady, hopeful. As I measured the detergent, I caught my reflection in the dryer door. And for the first time in a long, long time, I recognized the woman looking back. There was a new confidence in my eyes, one I barely recognized but welcomed when I caught my reflection in the dryer door. "Mom, can we get snacks from the vending machine?" my youngest asked, already staring at the rows of candy bars behind the glass. I smiled and dug a few coins from my pocket. "Sure, honey, get something for your sister, too." It was such a small thing, saying yes to a treat, but it still filled me with a quiet, grateful joy. There were so many times when even a couple dollars had felt impossible. As I folded a warm stack of laundry fresh from the dryer, I noticed a woman sitting alone in the corner. Her posture was hunched, her eyes glued to the floor, her fingers worrying a worn-out tissue. Exhaustion clung to her like a shadow, the kind of exhaustion I knew all too well. Her clothes were clean but faded, her messy ponytail more about survival than style. A small boy, maybe 7 or 8, sat beside her absorbed in a tattered comic book. The scene hit me hard. It was like staring back in time at my old self. I watched quietly as she checked her dryer for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, glancing nervously at her phone. I recognized every one of those movements. Counting quarters in your head, calculating what you can skip at the grocery store to make laundry day work. I took a breath, set down the shirt in my hands, and walked over. "Hi there," I said gently, not wanting to startle her. I couldn't help but notice, "You look like you might be having a rough day." She looked up, startled. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else flickering there, maybe hope, maybe the recognition of someone who understood. "I'm fine," she said automatically. The same thing I used to say. I sat down in the chair next to her. "I know what it's like," I said softly. "Carrying everything on your shoulders, feeling like no one else can possibly understand how heavy it all is." Her eyes filled with tears, she tried to blink away. "That obvious, huh?" she joked weakly, her voice cracking. "Only because I've been exactly where you are," I said, "but you're not alone. There are people who want to help, people who get it, who won't judge you." She looked at me then, really looked. "How did you—" she started, then stopped. "One day at a time," I said, "and with help from people who showed me that accepting support isn't weakness, it's strength." I reached into my pocket and pulled out one of Rita's cards. "There's a whole community ready to support you," I said, handing it to her. She took the card carefully, like it was something fragile, something valuable. A small smile tugged at her lips, the first real smile I'd seen from her, and it felt like watching my past self take her first step toward believing things could be different. The next morning, I stood at my kitchen window, watching the early sun stretch long shadows across the backyard. A soft breeze rustled through the maple tree, a tree I used to see as just another headache I couldn't afford to maintain. Now I could appreciate its beauty again. The past few weeks had changed my life in ways I never imagined. My hands curled around a warm mug of coffee, a simple comfort I'd learned to savor again. Fresh coffee filled the air, blending with the smell of toast my kids were making. Their playful voices drifted into the kitchen, making me smile. At the repair shop, everything had begun to fall into a natural rhythm. My hands, once clumsy with tools and parts, now moved with growing confidence. Mike had become more than a boss. He was a patient mentor, teaching me not just mechanics, but how to believe in myself. The other mechanics treated me like family. We shared jokes at lunch, exchanged tips, and supported each other through the busiest days. The heaviness that used to sit on my shoulders had lifted. I could breathe again, knowing my next paycheck wasn't a question mark. Yesterday, I'd successfully diagnosed an electrical issue on a bike all on my own. Me, the woman who once stood terrified in a laundromat, unsure how she'd make it to the next week. My kids noticed the change too. They no longer tiptoed around me or hesitated to talk about school expenses. Instead, they eagerly asked about my day, laughing at my stories from the shop, curious about the different bikes and the riders who owned them. Sarah even started asking questions about engines, her eyes bright with curiosity. Tommy pitched in around the house with a newfound sense of pride. The bikers had become more than helpers, they were family. Rita stopped by often, not to check in but to share coffee and conversation. This community had taught me something I'd never truly understood. Strength isn't doing everything alone. It's knowing when to lean and when to stand tall. I moved to the kitchen table where a small stack of papers waited. Bills that used to make my stomach twist now felt manageable. My budget notebook showed careful planning, and for the first time in years, a small savings balance. On top of the stack sat a rent receipt paid on time. No fear attached. I picked up my phone and scrolled through recent messages, one from Mike about a training session, another from Rita about a weekend barbecue, and several from mothers I'd met through the charity. Each message was a thread in the support net wrapped around our lives. The sound of footsteps filled the hallway as my kids joined me at the table. Plates piled with toast and scrambled eggs. Tommy had gotten good at making simple meals. Sarah carried herself with new confidence, no longer ashamed of our situation, but proud of how we'd pushed through together. I watched them eat, my heart overflowing. For the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't just surviving, we were living. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would always be new challenges, new worries, new goals to reach. But now, for the first time in my life, I felt like I had the tools to face them. Real tools. Not just wrenches and sockets, but confidence, community, and a steady belief in myself that I'd never had before. I pulled my stack of bills closer and picked up a pen. Balancing my checkbook used to make my stomach twist into knots. Now, the numbers meant something different. Stability, security, a future. Every paid bill felt like another small victory. Every balanced line in my notebook felt like one more step forward. That evening, I stood on the small concrete landing outside my apartment, watching the sky fade into streaks of orange and pink. The air carried the first cool hints of autumn, crisp enough to make me pull my leather jacket tighter around my shoulders, the jacket the bikers had surprised me with a few weeks ago. Below me, the parking lot buzzed with the normal evening routine. Neighbors coming home from work, kids playing between the cars, and somewhere in the distance, the familiar rumble of motorcycles. Funny how that sound used to make me anxious, and now it felt like hearing old friends arriving. I leaned against the railing and watched the sun sink behind the rooftops. My apartment wasn't in the nicest part of town, but it was home. The potted plants I'd added to the landing swayed gently in the breeze, adding a bit of color to the gray concrete. Through the window behind me, I could see the warm glow of the kitchen light, and my kids hunched over their homework. The past few months had changed everything. The repair shop had become more than just a place to work. It was where I'd found my footing. My hands that once shook every time I picked up a tool, now moved with confidence. Fixing a broken engine, bringing something dead back to life. It felt like a perfect metaphor for the changes in my own life. I heard the sound of engines growing louder. Rita and two other bikers turned into the parking lot, their bikes gleaming in the fading sunlight. They waved up at me, and warmth bloomed in my chest. These people, these strangers I'd met in a laundromat, they'd become my family. My phone buzzed. A message from Mike. Tomorrow's schedule, plus a reminder about the upcoming charity ride. I wasn't just receiving help anymore. I was part of the helping. Last weekend, I'd even fixed another single mother's car, passing on the kindness that had been given to me. Rita walked up the stairs and joined me on the landing. We stood together in quiet companionship, watching the last light of day fade behind the buildings. She glanced at me. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I smiled and turned toward her, really seeing the strength and kindness in her face. "I was just thinking," I said, "about how different everything is now. Not just the practical stuff, though that's better too, but how I feel about life." A breeze rustled the leaves in the maple tree nearby, carrying the scent of someone's dinner drifting through the air. Inside, my kids laughed at something, and the sound warmed me all the way through. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living, building a life, making memories, planning for a future that felt real instead of impossible. This community had taught me what strength really meant. It wasn't white-knuckling your way through life alone. It was knowing when to lean on others, and when to reach out your hand to help someone else climb. Later that night, the kids and I sat around the worn kitchen table. It looked different these days, clean, organized, bright in the soft evening light. Tommy and Sarah had finished their homework, and I'd set out a plate of cookies I'd baked. Another small luxury I could finally afford again. The kitchen smelled like chocolate and vanilla. "So," I said, dipping a cookie into my milk, "what's on your minds?" I'd noticed them exchanging looks all evening, that silent sibling language I still didn't fully understand. Sarah sat up straighter, her 12-year-old confidence showing. "Mom, remember how I've been drawing during lunch break?" She pulled her sketchbook from her backpack. The corners were worn from use. "Miss Thompson says I have real talent. She thinks I might be able to get into the art program next year." I opened the sketchbook. Each page was better than the last. Landscapes, portraits, little scenes full of color and creativity. "These are beautiful," I whispered. "Miss Thompson is right. You've got a real gift." Tommy cleared his throat, looking nervous but determined. "I've been thinking too, Mom." He fiddled with a cookie, breaking it into pieces. "You know how I've been helping out at the shop sometimes? Mike showed me how the business side works. And," he paused, gathering courage, "I think I want to study business in college. Maybe open my own shop someday." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them back. Just months ago, we could barely think about next week. Now, my kids were dreaming years ahead, talking about careers, passions, possibilities. "You know what?" I said, leaning forward so they could see the certainty in my eyes. "These aren't just dreams, they're real possibilities. And we're going to figure out how to make them happen." Sarah's eyes went wide. "But art supplies are expensive. And college—" Tommy's voice trailed off, worry creasing his young forehead. I reached out and took both their hands in mine. My palms were rougher now from work at the shop, but they were steady and sure. "Listen to me," I said. "We're not where we used to be. I'm not saying everything will be easy, but we've got something now we didn't have before." I squeezed their hands gently. "We've got support, we've got skills, and most importantly, we've got hope." "Really?" Sarah whispered, squeezing back. I smiled. "Really? You really think I could be an artist?" Sarah asked, her voice rising with hope. "And I could run a business?" Tommy added, sounding more confident than I'd heard in a long time. "I don't just think it," I told them, meeting both their eyes. "I know it. Look at everything we've already pulled off. A few months ago, I didn't know a single thing about motorcycle repair. Not one bolt, not one tool. And now I'm doing it every day. We got through moments I wasn't sure we'd survive, but we did. Your dreams, They're just the next challenge, and we're going to tackle them together. Sarah launched herself into my arms, hugging me tight. Tommy followed a second later, and I pulled them both close. I breathed them in, their shampoo, their warmth, the steady presence of their small bodies pressed against me. These were my reasons, my heart, my purpose. And now they were learning what I had finally discovered. With determination, support, and courage, any dream is possible. Later that week, I pushed open the familiar glass door of the laundromat. The bell chimed overhead, loud and bright. The same fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting that stark glow I once hated. But everything felt different now. My steps were steady. My shoulders were straight. Even with the heavy laundry bag weighing down one arm, my heart felt light. The washing machines whirred their familiar rhythm, once a soundtrack to my despair, now nothing more than a simple comfort. A reminder of how far I'd come. As I sorted my clothes, my eyes drifted across the room until they landed on a woman sitting in the corner. Her posture caught me instantly. Shoulders slumped forward, eyes down. Fingers anxiously twisting a torn receipt. Something inside me stirred. I knew that posture. I knew that sinking feeling. I had lived it. Her clothes were worn but clean. A young boy sat beside her, absent-mindedly flipping through a dog-eared comic book. Every few minutes, she checked her phone, her face tightening with worry each time the screen lit up. I recognized that look, too. The silent math of counting quarters, checking bank balances, waiting for replies from job applications, hoping for a break that never seemed to come. That memory hit me right in the chest. Without giving myself time to overthink, I walked over. "Mind if I sit?" I asked gently, motioning to the empty seat beside her. She startled slightly, then nodded, shifting to make room. Up close, I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the dark circles, the slight tremor in her hands as she folded a small pile of T-shirts. "I'm Linda," I said softly, and I couldn't help noticing. I paused, choosing my words with care. "Well, I noticed you look like you're carrying a heavy load today. And I don't mean the laundry." Her hands froze mid-fold. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice came out small, trembling. "Is it that obvious?" I gave her a gentle smile, only to someone who's been there. I glanced around the laundromat. The same walls, the same machines, the same echoes of the worst day of my life. Only now, I stood here as someone entirely different. "A few months ago," I said quietly, "I sat right where you are, feeling alone, overwhelmed, like every part of my life was falling apart." She finally lifted her eyes to mine. "Really?" she whispered. "What changed?" "I learned something important," I said, leaning forward just a little. "You're not alone. We all have battles, but we don't have to fight them by ourselves. And sometimes," I smiled, "help comes from the most unexpected places." Her gaze softened, but doubt lingered. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've always handled things on my own." "So did I replied. I reached into my purse and pulled out one of the biker charity cards. I always carried a few now, never knowing when I might need one. I held it out to her. But sometimes being strong means being brave enough to accept help when someone offers. Her fingers trembled as she took the card. She studied it like it was a fragile treasure. Her son leaned closer, curiosity replacing his earlier boredom. "There are people who want to help," I continued. "Good people who understand exactly what you're going through. I know because they helped me when I needed it most." I smiled at her boy, remembering how my own kids had flourished once we found the right community. Once we were no longer alone. The woman clutched the card to her chest like it was a lifeline. Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Thank you." I reached out and gently squeezed her hand. And in that moment, the full weight of my own journey hit me. Where I'd been, where I was now, and who I'd become. Not just a mother trying to survive, not just a woman desperate for help, but someone who could offer it. Someone strong, someone sure, someone rebuilt from the inside out.